An important question that we have to ask Christians is with regards to the different portrayals of Jesus in the four different Gospels. What's interesting is that it seems that historians have agreed that Mark is the earliest Gospel, and then Matthew and Luke come a little bit later, and then John is the latest. It's the furthest away from the actual historical Jesus. And when you keep that in mind, and then you take a look at the different ways that Jesus is portrayed, you find that there is this significant transformation. It seems as if the further away you go from the historical Jesus, the more he becomes divine. In other words, you have a lower Christology, if you will, for the earlier Gospels, and then as it gets further and further away from the historical Jesus, you get a higher Christology, more of a divine figure. So to highlight this, I'd like to read a few passages from Mark. Again, Mark being, according to Christian historians, the earliest Gospel. Mark 1:32-34 says, "That evening after sunset, the people brought to Jesus all the sick and demon-possessed. The whole town gathered at the door, and Jesus healed many who had various diseases. He also drove out many demons, but he would not let the demons speak because they knew who he was." That's interesting. We have a statement here that says that he was preventing the demons from declaring who he was. So it's as if he wants to keep his identity hidden. Let's go on. Mark 1:40-45. "A man with leprosy came to him and begged him on his knees, 'If you are willing, you can make me clean.' Jesus was indignant. He reached out his hand and touched the man. 'I am willing,' he said, 'be clean.' Immediately the leprosy left him and he was cleansed. Jesus sent him away at once with a strong warning. 'See that you don't tell this to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them.' Instead, he went out and began to talk freely, spreading the news. As a result, Jesus could no longer enter a town openly, but stayed outside in lonely places, yet the people still came to him from everywhere." So again, you have this scene depicting Jesus as somebody who does a miracle, tells the guy, "Don't let people know what I did for you." And then when the person goes against that, tells everybody he is trying to get away from the crowds and trying to live in an area a little bit more isolated to get away from the crowds. Seems like a very mysterious figure. Mark 3:7-12 says, "Jesus withdrew with his disciples to the lake, and a large crowd from Galilee followed. When they heard about all he was doing, many people came to him from Judea, Jerusalem, Idumea, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, and the regions across the Jordan and around Tyre and Sidon. Because of the crowd, he told his disciples to have a small boat ready for him to keep the people from crowding him. For he had healed many, so that those with diseases were pushing forward to touch him. Whenever the impure spirits saw him, they fell down before him and cried out, 'You are the Son of God.' But he gave them strict orders not to tell others about him." That's the third instance where you find in the earliest gospel, Jesus being portrayed as somebody who doesn't want anybody to know who he is and silencing those who want to say it. Then we have another instance, Mark 5:38-43, when Jesus, when they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha kum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this, they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat. So now we have a situation where people are saying this little girl has died. He says, "No problem, I'll bring her back," or she's just sleeping, and then she raises up and it's this miracle, and then he tells everybody, "Don't tell anybody what I just did." Very interesting. A final citation on this regard, Mark 8:27-30. Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. On the way he asked them, "Who do you say I am?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Peter answers, "You are the Messiah." Jesus warned them not to tell anybody about him. Now, you have 5 different instances. That's pretty significant. 5 different instances in the earliest gospel describing Jesus as somebody who wanted nobody to know who he was. Now we can contrast that with the Gospel of John. in the Gospel of John, you have the highest amount of, you could say, divinity, the most amount of, or the highest Christology. You see that it seems that Jesus just continuously talks about himself. He keeps declaring, I am. There's so many famous I am statements. Like, for example, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That's not Jesus speaking, but still, this is the beginning of how the Gospel starts in this sort of declaration. But then in terms of his actual citations, you have John 4:25-26 saying, I, the one speaking to you, I am he. So yes, the woman said, I know the Messiah, called Christ, is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything to us. Then Jesus declared, I, the one who is speaking to you, I am he. So you have this very clear statement of Jesus saying who he is, wanting to declare it. Then you have also in John 6:35, then Jesus declared, I am the bread of life. You also have in John 8:12, I am the light of the world. You have in John 8:58, very truly I tell you, Jesus answered, before Abraham was born, I am. So this is what Christians point to as a divinity claim. Then you have in John 10:7, it says, very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. You have in John 10:11, I am the good shepherd. You have in John 11:25, I am the resurrection and the life. You have in John 13:14, now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet. So he's declaring himself as your Lord and your teacher. Same thing with John 14:6. You have Jesus answered, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And then John 15:1, I am the true vine. So now, this is my point. How do we reconcile this? How do we reconcile that Mark is painting Jesus as extremely mysterious, wanting nobody to know who he is? And then you also have Matthew and Luke also not containing these incredibly sort of epic statements about I am this and I am that. And yet those are the three that they're known as the Synoptic Gospels. Synoptic meaning that they're from the same perspective. And these Gospels, the reason why they're called that is because they follow the same trajectory. They follow the same storyline essentially, whereas John has a very different description. The main aspects of Jesus' life aren't covered in that same way and in the same order, or many of the same stories are not there. And so it's a very, very different gospel. And the biggest difference is that Jesus continuously declares who he is. And so just as, if you're genuinely searching for the truth, does this make any sense? Does it make sense that Jesus would have said all these incredible statements to everybody that was around him? And the people that were around him the most were who? Were the disciples. And so if we're going to believe that the disciples heard all this, is it reasonable to think that they just simply forgot to mention it or didn't think it was important to mention in the Synoptic Gospels, in Matthew and Mark and Luke? Why wouldn't they mention these things? Why would they avoid these incredible statements? Did they forget about it? Were they not listening to it? Did they not hear it? Did they not think it was important? Or is it possible that the reason why it wasn't included was because it wasn't said? And the reason why it's only mentioned in John is because John is the furthest away from the historical Jesus and has the most additions to it. And so I don't know how Christians reconcile this. I don't know how he can be both a mysterious figure and somebody who continuously describes himself. This is something that I think Christians need to ask themselves, and hopefully you can take a look at these citations for yourselves and really ask yourself, does this make any sense? And from our perspective, the fact that the Christology or the divinity of Jesus gets lesser and lesser as you get closer and closer to the actual historical Jesus, as you get the earlier and earlier accounts, is very clear evidence that if you get all the way back to the actual real Jesus, he is a prophet of God, not a deity claiming divinity in any way, shape, or form. So that's it for today. Assalamu alaikum.